take a look how we can authenticate users to our application. So we can start creating our users and display some data from Firebase. The first thing we need to do is to go back to the Firebase console. And here under the Authentications tab, I'm in my project, by the way, the one we created before. Authentication, sign-in methods. And here there are all the available options that Firebase gives us just out of the box. So let's enable Google. The other ones like Twitter and Facebook or GitHub, you need to add your API key if you want to use them. And this you need to create an account with them, and then you can get this information here. Let's also add the email and password. In this course, I'm going to cover the email link and the OAuth authentication. And let's go. So enable email password and Google. If you have the developer's account, you can add them as well, because the same code we're going to use for Google is going to work for the other providers as well. So if you want to create the account, we're gonna build that as well. And another point here is the template. Here are the templates that's going to send. By default, you cannot change the writings on it. Here is that information we added when you created the project, the app facing name. The only thing you can change here is the template language, because whenever someone resets or get a change of address, or also here for the email verification, we're gonna send them an email and this is what's gonna show. So the only thing you can change is the app name here and the template. Also this one, but it does take, when you customize your domain, it does take quite a while, and it's quite, sometimes doesn't work for, you need to contact them to make it work. I've tried many times and then I was waiting and then I just give up to add my own domain in here instead of the Firebase app. So for the app, for this name here, the location is here under project, and the public facing name, that's the name that's gonna appear inside the email. Anyways, let's go back to our code and we're going to start coding. Now, if you're new to Angular, Angular uses a service layer to do all the logic of your application. So in that case, the pages and components would be only for displaying data, and services are for business logic, contact Firebase in our case. So now let's go ahead and start create a component that will hold our authentication together. But unlike we created in here admin and the post and the user, we have a top level admin module that controls the other pages, which has its own module as well. I'm just going to create a page that will hold the authentication. If you want to go a different way and create multiple sign-in pages, sign-up pages, you can go and do the same way as we did with the user module. But in our case, I'm gonna put all the code inside one component for sign-in and registration, because we only gonna need user input for the email if they want to get the authentication with link, and there will be buttons which works both ways for registration and login. So let's create a page, ng generate page auth. You can name it however you like, login or whatever. Now here, as you can see, we have our module top level now. And I'm gonna also create a service, and the service you create the same way, ng generate service, or S for short, and then auth, and I'm gonna call it auth as well. Okay, our authentication link to the page was done in here. I'm gonna leave the same name, but if you want to change it, go ahead. Now, first thing we're going to need is the Angular Fire Auth from Angular Fire library, and we're also going to import auth from the Firebase/app. Also observable from RxJS. Now here I'm going to create a variable that's going to hold our user. So it's going to be public because you're going to be using for inside our other components. Now here's user. I'm going to add a $sign because this is going to be an observable. And this will be the data from the authentication. Firebase user, this interface comes from the Firebase SDK. So inside our constructor, we need to import router. Now it got imported in here and it's from Angular. So move it up. And we also need to instantiate the Angular Fire library here. Now this name here, you can name however you like. This is just a variable that's going to hold the library, so you can have access to it inside our component. So here now we just need to do this.user equals this.afauth, and if you do a dot, you have access to everything that all the properties inside this Angular Fire 2. So we have the auth state. Auth state, you listen for the authentication if the user is there or not. You're going to use the user over here, and if you hover over it, you can see that it returns an observable of a Firebase user, which is the same as we are asking over here. Now if you control click in it, it's gonna take you to the auth typing page, and as you can see in here, it either gonna return user or null. The same goes for the auth state. Now let's create a few functions that we're going to use to authenticate the user with the provider. This is going to be private because this is going to be used for another function that we're going to use, and it's also going to be async because you need to wait for some stuff to happen and then get that result. So I'm going to call it OAuth handler, but you can name however you like, and this will take a provider. So auth provider, that's the typing, and it comes from Firebase. Now here we need to create a variable that is going to hold the result of this authentication method. So this.afauth, and here we need to, there are two options that you can use. There is the sign in with redirect or with pop-up. I prefer to use the pop-up because it looks nice when you're using a mobile phone. It takes up the full screen, and I had some problems before with the redirect when you're creating a PWA. So I'm going to choose the pop-up, but you can play around and see what goes better for your use case. Now after this, and if there is a result there, if something happened, we can return this.router, and we navigate people from the authentication page. There are two ways in Angular that you can navigate. Either with the navigate and then you pass an array with some information, or you navigate by URL. The URL will just pass a string with URL. So here we pass an array, and first it takes the path, and also you can send more information like some data, ID for example. But in our case, you just want to send them somewhere else. So if they authenticate, we send them to the root of our application. Now let's use this function somewhere else. I'm going to create now a public function. I'm just going to call it Google. So here we need to constant to hold up a provider, which will be the type auth provider here. It's just the interface, and we can call new auth. Let's go Google auth provider, and this is a class. Now, the only way you can get this Google provider is if you import OAuth from Firebase, and you need to pass the app, otherwise it will not recognize your credentials. Angular Fire doesn't have this Google provider or any other provider for that matter. So now that you have the provider, we can just return this.oauth handler and pass the provider to this function we've created in here. Alright, now for you to create more, you can just do the same. Do like Twitter. And here just change for the Twitter of provider. The same way you have access to all of the other ones. Phone provider, Twitter, Google, GitHub. So I'm gonna keep Twitter over here and leave in here as a reference. But all of them, you're holding the provider that you're creating, instantiate a new class of it, and you pass into this function here at the bottom. Really easy. Now let's just add a button. Before that, let's create a logout function. So this will be public as well. Now for the logout, just call up the Angular Fire library and then auth, sign out. There we go. If you prefer, you can just return something else in here, like this.router and navigate as well, in case you want them to go somewhere else. So here you can just do like this. But then that's up to you. I'll leave it on. Now let's go to our template and create some buttons and that we can use to authenticate. So here on the auth page.html, I'm just gonna add an Ion button. Now I'm gonna add an icon as well. That's going to be logo Google. Now because I want to add text as well, I need to add a slot. I'm gonna put before the text, so here's gonna be Google. So like that. So the icon appears before, and then the Google, the text. So now we need to create a function that is going to do this login for us. So I'm gonna just call it login with Google. And now we need to go to our auth.ts page, authpage.ts, and create this function. Now you could call it straight away from the template, and I'll show you how. But let's first instantiate our auth service. Here we need to call it auth service, just like that, and it got imported up in here. So this is the variable, you can name however you like. And then if you want to use it straight without a function, here, you could add this as a public. And then here just call auth.google, and then it's gonna pull it up straight from the auth service Google, and this would call it straight from our service in here, this function. But I'm gonna create a new function, and then I'm going to, here on the authpage.ts, I'm gonna do a try catch block. And here we can just return this.authservice.google, and then you can console log any error that might come up. So error.code and error.message. Now we don't need this, but it's good to know if something happened. And later on, we're gonna learn how we can handle error a little bit better with messages for the user on the front end. I'm just gonna copy this and create one for the Twitter. And here I'm going to change as well Twitter. Oh. Now let's create a link and that we can use to visit our page. So back in our app component.ts here, let's just add a new entry for our authentication. There we go. So now with this done, let's go back to our template and let's add the buttons and the menu bar over here so we can easily navigate around our application. So we've done this before. We have our start array of buttons, and then I'm gonna also add the end one for the Ion menu button. You can do login, register. Now this is done. Let's start our server and then we can check it out. So npm start. Okay, now we have it here. We can open up we have our authentication on the menu. I'm gonna open the dev tool so we can check it out here in the console. First, gonna open the application, and if you press escape key, you can have access to the console here at the bottom. Now, in our authenticate page, we have our button over there. Just gonna click. You have this pop up. Nothing's happened. We got redirected to our root application, our home page. And if you check it out here under the index.db, you're gonna have this item now. And this is where Firebase stores all its information. And if you click on the local storage, there's this Firebase user here. And if you check out the value, that's the email I used and the display name that I got from my Google account. So you successfully authenticate a user. Now, if you go back to our Firebase console and reload, we have the user and it was authenticated with this provider, and this is the user ID. Now let's display this data inside our application, the name and whatever else. So back in the code, it's gonna minimize here. Inside our page.ts, I'm gonna instantiate the user that we created here. If you remember, we added this observable of Firebase user. I'm gonna subscribe to this data from my auth page. So auth page.ts, you can either create a function inside the auth page class, or you can do the same thing like leave it public, the auth service, and call it straight from here. We're gonna do that now so you can see how that can go. But later we're gonna change it to get information from Firebase store, Firestore. So let's just do this way now, which is a simpler way, but it's not really recommended because you should do your error handlers so you can tell the user what's happening and if something went wrong. But for our use case, I just wanna show some data from the Firebase auth object. Now inside our Ion content, just gonna make some space over here, and the first thing I wanna do is create a div. So here on the paragraph, let's display the username. If you're new to Angular, for you to display data, you should instantiate the object on your template, and then you just can use the double curly brace, and then you just call it like display name, for example. Now here we don't have the user yet, but we will create in a bit. Now let's add a button that will take the user to this user profile page. So Ion button, say view profile. Now here we can call router link. We used that before. And then let's do user, which is the page the root level for the user we created before here on the module. We have user, and then we have the user ID. So here we need to call user and then pass the ID, which you can do by just adding the user UID over here. Just like that. And this UID is coming from the Firebase OAuth object. If you check it out in here, this is the unique user ID that was generated when the user was created. And we're gonna use it a lot. This is very important for us. And then we can show also a button for logout. So here we can call click, and we can call it straight from the user service logout, just like that. Now to instantiate the user, we're gonna use the ngIf, and it comes from Angular, and you do it with the star ngIf. And the easiest way for you to subscribe to data is to use the async pipe from Angular. We're gonna take a look in depth about the async pipe, but it goes like you get your data, which in case is our user observable that we created, and then you use the pipe symbol and async. And what this does, it will create a subscription of whatever data you pass into it, and behind the scenes you automatically unsubscribe to the data when this component is not in use anymore. So it's really good. You should try to always use it to leverage the Angular framework. Now here I'm gonna adding as user. This is when you use the as, you are making an alias for this user object over here, and then you can use them in there. You can name it however you like. Now this should display our data in the application. If you take a look, our server is running, and if you go to our application, you need to go to the auth page. Now I have my name over there. Hello, that comes from the object in here, view profile, and the logout button. Now if I click on the view profile, I go to my profile page, and as you can see, this is the ID that we're getting over here. And this is really important for us to navigate throughout the application and get the user data. Later on, we're going to use this ID from here and get the data to display over here. So now let's just hide this Google button, the authentication button, in case the user is authenticated. That's really simple to do. We're going to use the Angular templating system as well, and we can just create a ng template over here, and what this does is gonna hide based on condition that we're gonna add here. So if there is a user, we're gonna display this here at the top as a default. And then if not, we're gonna display this one. So here I'm just gonna add a div, and I'm gonna push this button inside. Just gonna add Ion padding over here, so we have some padding. As you can see here, it's all stuck to the end. I'm gonna add to both of these ones. Now, as you can see, my padding got in there, but our button disappeared. So now we need to write that condition, and you can do that if there is a user, we show this. That's the ng if is about. It's an if condition. And then if not, like else, we show login. And this is a variable only. You just need to add here at the template, give the name of it. So if there is a user, you show the user. If not, else we show the login, which is you add a ng template tag. This will be hidden if this one is true. And then if it's false, it shows this one. Now let's take a look. So back to our page. As you can see, if you reload, it takes a little while to display the data, and that's the observable. It's waiting for the data to arrive and then displaying the data there. So first I'm going to log out. And the logout redirect me to the root. So I need to go back to page, to the auth page. And here we have the bottom again. But this is gonna redirect me. So let's remove this redirect so we can see better in the auth page. Auth service. It's gonna remove here for a little while and here as well. There we go. So back to the page. Log out. Login, and my name is over there. And there we go. So this is how easy it is to use Firebase to leverage authentication for us. Everything is done securely, and with just a few lines of code you can get authentication on your application.